Going on, everybody? Already messed up my background coming into this. You saw my face staring at the computer a little bit here at the beginning before officially now coming in. Of course, this is great podcasting for those listening on audio only. Anyway, Kevin Cole here, solo pod, unexpected points. No Josh Hermsmeyer. I sent the Herminator the topics for the week. A lot of stuff on week one of the preseason, quarterbacks, this and that. Herms was like, yeah, I got nothing to add here. so I decided it might be better actually to roll solo on this just because I have too much to add. With the caveat, okay, I'm going to caveat up front. I don't want to have to say this every single time I talk about something, that all of this preseason stuff, the clips, the training camp, everything else, largely meaningless when we talk about its relative importance vis-a-vis our expectations based upon these quarterbacks draft position and what they have done in previous NFL seasons, especially for the quarterbacks who we actually have some NFL evidence from. I'll talk about that. Like that's, that is what it is. But I still want to talk about it because I still got some stuff to talk about. In particular, when things don't matter as much or certain attributes of what happens should be valued more highly or lowly than others, it still presents some opportunity vis-a-vis public perception and perhaps even the market in some circumstances, perhaps even betting markets in some circumstances, how we can view things. Yeah, and I see someone's already dropping some Q&A. Drop your Q&A in here on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube, get on YouTube, subscribe, get the thing so it'll notify you when I'm going to go live on here when I've scheduled something. Otherwise, get it as the podcast, whatever. Consume it however it works best for you. But you can at least get some questions in on the Q&A if you go ahead and get on the live stuff. All right, so let's talk. We got news. You got big news that just broke. I don't have a horn here or something. Actually, do I have any? Let's see. Do I have any? Do I have a horn or some sort of musical thing? No, unfortunately, I do not. Then we got breaking news on JJ McCarthy, which, spoiler alert, when I was going to talk about him, I was actually going to label McCarthy's preseason as being, or week one of the preseason being the most impressive. How I sort through the numbers and then also look at the contextual evidence behind what happened week one. But the news, which has just dropped vis-a-vis various NFL insiders, all of them got a taste on this one for what's going in. But I'll go ahead and bring up Schefter's post here on what's being said. So according to the Scheftinator, the Herminator, the Scheftinator, we have Vikings rookie first round pick JJ McCarthy is expected to undergo. Come on, Chef, you gotta use that edit function to undergo knee surgery that will determine how much time he will be sidelined. Yeah, this is not a well crafted tweet. Who's copy editing this stuff for Schefter? McCarthy complained about knee soreness over the weekend and underwent an MRI on Monday night. I got to get one of these things. Schefter has this breaking news from Adam Schefter graphic that he puts up with the person. I got to figure out how I can do like breaking news for unexpected points and have a similar sort of graphic there. Okay, so how much does this matter or not? What we're talking about here for McCarthy? Well, meniscus ain't no joke, but there's a pretty wide range of outcomes. So the results of my 10 minutes of Google searching on meniscus tears and operations. And I'm sure if you're following some doctors on some like fantasy football doctors or whoever on Twitter, they'll have a better explanation of this, although not that much better. Let's face it. Like, what's the difference between having Google at your fingertips and going to med school? Probably not that big of a difference. So what it says is that there's two different types because we know it's going to be surgery. Okay. So it's possible if you had a meniscus injury of some sort, it could be so minor that you wouldn't need surgery, or maybe if you're being more conservative, you wouldn't need surgery. Maybe if you're not a professional athlete who has, a few months to play NFL football and then a bunch of months to sit around and do nothing, that you don't want to take the conservative route while we're less than a month before the regular season starts. So there is going to be some sort of surgery. Now, it looks like there's two types of surgery, a partial and a total surgery. Hopefully, we're talking about the first type here. And the first type is here, there's some sort of tear in the meniscus, which ends up discomfort. And that kind of sounds like what we're talking about here for McCarthy. And they just go in there and they, snip it out. Arthroscopic surgery, they put the camera in there, they get in from some different holes and they, they take that whatever's bothering out there. And then we have 3 to 6 weeks to recover. As I mentioned, we're about 4 weeks out from when the NFL season is going to start. So would not have any chance of starting week 1. Although with Darnold there, I'm not sure what the chances would have been of starting week 1 anyway. According to the betting markets, I couldn't even find McCarthy starting week 1 for a betting number. I did find May and Knicks as part of that in the betting market, but I couldn't find McCarthy in a very cursory investigation into it. So it seems like most people were assuming that he wasn't going to start anyway. So that definitely completely rules out his starting here week 1. Now, if it's the more complete total surgery where I think they're just removing the meniscus, as I understand it, because it's so damaged that it's going to cause discomfort no matter what you leave in there. If that's done, we're talking 3 to 6 months of recovery. I think we've seen this before with players where basically their season's over if it happens shortly before the season starts or very early in the season. Like they done if that ends up happening. And going forward, the meniscus is kind of like a cushioning sort of cartilage in the knee. Not having a meniscus in your knee any longer, again, if you're doing the total surgery, which I don't think is going to be the case here, but who knows? You also have the follow-up of not having that cushioning, not having or potentially having more discomfort and things like that in the future. It's a quarterback, so it probably doesn't matter that much. But so we'll keep an eye out on those sorts of things, and I'm sure we'll be getting minute by minute updates as to what exactly is going on as you get more and more from McCarthy. Now, this isn't the normal unexpected points numbers based analysis, but if we're talking about McCarthy here, I think we have to look at what his reaction is here. And the reaction from McCarthy that we have here is, love you, Viking Nation. I'll be back in no time. Amor Fati? I don't know how you pronounce it. Had no clue what this was. So I had to, Google search and look it up. And it's a Latin phrase that translates to love of fate or love of one's fate. So this is kind of similar, I feel like, in some ways, but it's a new wrinkle on the one of the greatest tweets in the history of tweets from Denny Carter, CD Carter 13, where normally we talk about it in reference to his wide receiver tweet, which is, so he has like the prototypes for all these different position. So the wide receiver tweet is the one we talk about the most, which is the enemy speaks kindly and holds a knife, which basically wide receivers tweet stuff like that all the time. The most persecuted people on the planet. Everyone's out to get them. Typical quarterback tweet, those. Love my teammates. God is good. So what do we think about the fact that JJ McCarthy, instead of God is good, we're getting some Latin in here? I don't know if I like it. I don't know if I like it from a vibes-based analysis. We want our quarterbacks to be, patriotic, love their religion, love their U.S. Army, love their teammates, of course, as part of the tweet. Latin sound a little too highfalutin for me, quite honestly. JJ McCarthy, stay in your lane, buddy. Don't be giving me anything I have to look up on Google. When we're talking about here, this is like a carpe diem sort of situation here. Young Poet Society. This guy's sounding a little too bourgeois for me. But anyway, but in all seriousness, I'll keep on that. I'm still going to talk about McCarthy later because I think he was excellent so far in his first start. So Another piece of little news related stuff, and I don't have a lot to add about this, but the Hassan Reddick contract fiasco probably should be touched on. We're almost to the point with this that because everyone is going to pile on the Jets for blowing this, not having a contract negotiated in advance before making the trade. Now there's like a trade request after an earlier trade request, which is like the trade request squared. I don't know if you've ever seen a situation like this. It is worthy of derision and mockery. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong here. I am no defender of Joe Douglas and the Jets and what they've done with a number of draft picks, with the Aaron Rodgers trade, with everything else that's going on here. But, we might be getting to the point where there are some extenuating circumstances here. Like if something has never been seen before, right? Then it's possible that maybe Douglas and the brass over there at the Jets didn't just do something completely unprecedented. Like these guys all go by precedent a lot of the time. So maybe Reddick really did pull an okey doke on them. Gave him a little head fake on what he wanted and now changed his request, and we'll see what's going on. Now, if you remember, this trade went down back on April 1st, so quite a while ago. It was a conditional third-round pick that can become a second-round pick if Reddick plays, a decent amount, and he's been a fairly healthy player throughout his career. That's healthy. Like that's a decent amount, especially being that he was going to have some juice left on. He was gonna, he was probably gonna get like an okay contract sort of extension or something going on here. Was this a 1-year rental sort of situation? Perhaps having Aaron Rodgers there could make that more likely, and the Jets really weren't looking to extend him further. I don't know. But if you remember, like the history for Reddick is 13th pick overall in the NFL draft. And maybe we can contrast this somewhat to Bryce Huff, who the Jets let go and then the Eagles picked up in free agency. So Huff was a UDFA. Huff was someone who hadn't really done a whole lot in his first 3 seasons and then had 10 sacks last year. I don't think he's near the player that Reddick is, but I think draft capital probably played into this to some degree because Reddick was the 13th overall pick. He had a largely unimpressive rookie stint, did not have his 5th-year option picked up by the Cardinals. Went to the Panthers for a year, had a pretty good year by my numbers, by my plus-minus numbers. By my plus-minus numbers, he went from being kind of negative his first 3 seasons to being worth about 10 points, which would be, roughly a third of a win. His 4th season moved up to 16.8 points. And then in 2021, for the Panthers, it was a 1-year contract there, then moved to the Eagles, moved up to 21.6 points in 2022, and then it tailed off a lot in 2023, which is interesting because most of this is based upon PFF pass rush grading, which fell significantly, but his numbers didn't fall that significantly. His headline sort of numbers, the types of numbers that you think would get a former top 13 pick paid, his sack numbers, he still had 13 sacks. So he's gone this is according to PFF. And remember, PFF there's no such thing as a half sack with PFF. They get a full credit for a sack on there. So from that last year with Arizona where he started to come forward, we're talking about 13, 15, 18, and 13 sacks. Yet his pressure numbers grading went off of being a 90 to down to a 75, which is still good, but that's why his plus minus numbers fall off a bit. So a pretty good player. I could see why he would want a lot of money, but it seems like the Jets are claiming that there was some sort of agreement in hand, which was then not honored by Reddick. So the 2 things we have here. So number 1, we have the Jets statement on this. So the Jets statement, and this is something, of course, that was getting shared like crazy, and everyone liking to pile in on it. So the Jets statement is, we have informed Hassan that we will not trade him. Of course, it's after trade request from the official account for the Jets here. You always got to double check that. That he is expected to be here with his teammates, that that he will continue to be fined per the CBA if he does not report. Since the trade discussions back in March, we have been clear, direct, and consistent with our position. Our focus will remain on the guys we have as we prepare for the regular season. Joe Douglas weighing in here. And again, Douglas is not someone who I feel like is a good GM generally, but maybe there's some chance of this. Now, they had a lot of contract negotiation problems with Jamal Adams in the past, who they eventually ended up trading, but it's kind of hard to look back on that and think that that was Joe Douglas's fault. I don't know if Adams is necessarily the most good faith negotiator when it came to some of this stuff too. Now, what's interesting is something that popped up where we have Connor Hughes, and you may be familiar with him or not. He is a beat reporter for the Jets. So his tweet here, and this is getting a lot of pushback because it basically looks like your stenographer for Joe Douglas here, and it may be true, it may not be true. But I think Hughes kind of fills that role a little bit. It's always interesting to me how you have some beat reporters who are like very pro regime, you could say, and then you have some who like criticize everything that the regime is doing. I think both are probably some sort of optimizing for engagement in a way, and as a beat reporter, rather than going back and forth. You have a funny situation in San Francisco where you have like one, you guys probably know who these people are, so I won't say who, or some of you will know who they are. But you have one who's very negative and kind of trolly, and then you have another one who's like overly positive, although I think done so in a genuine way about what's going on there in San Francisco. But back to Hughes here. So Hughes says the Jets were informed by Hassan Reddick's representation that he would report and play under his current contract. That obviously has not happened. So this is the dispute, according to what they're saying there. Are they liars? Probably not. I don't know. If they were, and that got out, that would be a little bit weird. But then at the same point in time, like, why would Reddick have come over if he was only going to play under his own contract? Did he think, I mean, the Eagles are a pretty good place to play, right? If you want to get a bigger contract going forward, I don't know. So continuing, this is a longer one. Connor's using that more than the 280 characters on this one. It says they let Reddick know they were open to adjusting his current deal, and then in parentheses, converting non-guaranteed to guaranteed, end parentheses, but only when he showed up. They would not commit to him until he committed to them. This is a little commitment issue here. Sounds like a bad 10-year relationship that's going off the rocks. The Jets will not cater to a player who has never played a down for them before. And of course, this is where he's getting killed, because they basically, would do, at least in the distorted version, the most distorted version of who they are, they would do whatever Aaron Rodgers asked them to do. Understandable, considering the message that would send to others in the locker room who also want a new deal. I don't know if I would print this stuff if I'd want this printed if I was the Jets, saying, they don't want to do something. Well, whatever. I mean, maybe. Again, they're trying to negotiate with other players, and at the same time says if Reddick wants to sit out this entire season, he can, but will be fined for each day and game missed. His contract will toll, and the Jets will retain his rights for next year. So that's the threat. That's the gauntlet being thrown down, is basically you're going to lose all your money for this year because you signed a pretty decent contract with the Eagles. Let's see what's left on Reddick's contract. Although, the Eagles like to front load these things. What do they got? $14.25 million base salary here. Not a bad number there. So if you think about how's the cap number so low? Okay, I don't even understand this contract here. Sometimes I get very confused by stuff that's on here. Is that a salary or not? Because the cap number says $750,000, but how could that possibly be true? Let me look up another one here. Apologies for this one. No, it says 14.25 million base salary. And I guess there was void money. That's what it is. Okay. So there was void money on this, which ended up getting wiped out, that the Eagles had to take as dead money before they traded him. But you still got that salary. I still don't quite understand how you have a bunch of salary and no dead cap. But anyway, so he obviously wouldn't get paid that. He would get fined. He would lose money. And then when they said the contract would toll, what they essentially mean is it just gets rebooted for next year. He's still the Jets still retain his rights for next season as if the contract is starting over again next season. So he can't even play out the clock and get out of Dodge as part of this holdout and then hit free agency next offseason. The Jets would still retain his rights there. So they're playing a little bit of hardball here. Again, the lesson is, either trust but verify, I guess, in the words of Ronald Reagan, where, trust your players, but make sure you have something to hold them to if they're going to say they're going to show up no matter whether they have an extension or not. And maybe don't be too credulous of the fact that they say, oh, well, I'll play out on this contract, but I really wanted to get out of the last place because they weren't going to pay me enough money and that sort of situation. Anyway, do your due diligence. And it seems like Joe Douglas may not have done enough of that in this particular situation. All right, let's move on to the preseason. So what everyone's waiting for. Everyone loves some preseason football. Again, I got my caveats, I believe, already out of the way about how little preseason probably matters or not. But I do have research on the preseason. And I'll talk about some of that quarterback research specifically. But before I get to the quarterback stuff, one thing that I want to mention about what I've learned in the preseason, which is dramatically changed my expectations for the regular season and probably matters, is like meaningful in some sort of way, is the NFL kickoffs. So if you remember or not, way back 2 weeks ago, when I was talking with Josh Hermsmeyer about this, our assessment was that we may see lower kickoff return rates than what you were hoping for. They were, in the 90 percentile. Not 90 percentile. They were about 90-something% returned in the XFL. The expectations in the NFL were somewhere between 40 and 60%. And I thought they might be a little bit lower than that when we're coming to the NFL because of the fact that the coverage team is a little bit further away. The kicker is a little bit closer so they can more easily get into the end zone. And the penalty for kicking it into the end zone and having a touchback was less. They brought the ball out to the 30-yard line rather than the 40-yard line. So I thought, a lot of teams might just, take the touchback, essentially. You're kicking off from your own 35. Kicker's got a pretty decent leg. They can get into the end zone. Maybe they'll just take the touchback more often than we're expecting. What I didn't anticipate, one thing I didn't anticipate because I was just wrong not anticipating this. Another thing I did not anticipate because I think it probably shouldn't have been expected, or there's a fundamental way that this is being adjudicated and refereed differently than what I expected, is the first thing I should have expected a little bit more is the fact that the NFL kick is closer means they can really get it accurately in that within 5 yards of the end zone. Whereas most of the kicks that were coming from the XFL were landing, around the 5, 6, 7, 8 yard line. So if you can really get it accurately to land on the 1, 2, 3, 4 yard line, maybe that tilts quite a few teams into saying we're willing to risk a long run back if we're going to consistently down them within the 30-yard line, which has been happening, by the way. Like more often than not, they're being taken down between the 20 and the 25, or at worst between the 25 and the 30. So not even getting to that 30-yard line. So I was wrong there. I should have thought about the fact that they're closer doesn't necessarily mean more touchbacks. It means they can kick it a little bit softer and get it into that zone, which ends up being potentially a profitable sort of zone. So mea culpa for me there. Might as well throw some Latin in myself. Not JJ McCarthy's not the only one who can do that. Although mine's a little bit more hackneyed sort of phraseology. The thing that I didn't anticipate that I probably shouldn't have even thought about anticipating was the fact that if you pause these things, this is what I've been doing on these kickoffs. If you pause them the moment the ball is caught by the coverage team, and again, like you can like bounce off of someone or whatever, like you don't know I can't give you the exact moment. But if you do that and you look at the coverage team, there's normally at least one guy, if not two guys, who have already taken off, who are basically starting to run in and anticipating right when the guy's about to catch it. I thought it was going to be catch, then go, right? But in the situation, it seems like it's go before the ball is even officially caught. And I think it has been flagged a couple of times, and I assume it's offsides is the call for the coverage team. It has been flagged sometimes, but not that often. They seem to be kind of letting it go, and that's a huge, huge difference. I discussed this with someone who will go unnamed, but may or may not have had a role in developing this kickoff for the XFL, and he agreed that it's like a huge difference. It's like a cheat code if you can start going early. And what the NFL probably should have done is have some sort of situation, and maybe they're implementing this, I don't know, where you have a referee who's standing, whoever's coming from behind the play in the end zone, with his hand up, and then the moment he's caught, he puts his hand down, and then everyone takes off and runs, because these guys are just like leaving early. There's no real setup here for what's going on, and I don't know if you could properly view everything from a referee's perspective for penalizing them, but they're kind of letting them get a little bit of a head start, or at least an immediate go without any sort of incremental pause before going. And because of that, I think the coverage has been really strong. So that's another thing I did not anticipate. If you can get that strong of coverage, then yeah, sure, go ahead, kick it off to the 1, 2, 3 yard line, and then you can swarm these guys a little bit earlier, a few yards earlier than what you may have otherwise with that running start, and it can make a big difference. So again, something I anticipated, something I didn't. We'll see if they referee this a little bit differently in the regular season, but it'll make sense. Going to the quarterbacking stuff, and this is gonna be the main thing that I'm gonna talk about here. First, I'll kind of highlight my own research on this, and specifically when it comes to second-year quarterbacks. Maybe we'll talk about second-year quarterbacks first. So I did some research last season at Unexpected Points. Again, go ahead, subscribe there, unexpectedpoints.substack.com, about whether the preseason matters or not for quarterbacks. This has been researched somewhat before by some others, but I tried to build upon that, looking at PFF grading and numbers that we're getting from PFF, which are some of the best place to get the preseason type of numbers if you have a premium subscription there. Because CJ Stroud's in the picture here. He had a nightmare start to the preseason. Doesn't matter. I guess that's maybe not. Maybe it doesn't then, based upon that one anecdotal episode. But as we go down, the numbers that I ended up pulling is saying regular season PFF passing grade versus preseason passing grade. So, we put the preseason on the old x-axis. We put the regular season on the old y. Say, how much does one inform the other? Well, there's actually a decent little relationship, at least at the top. Like if someone really kills it in the preseason, and again, limited volume here. We're going from 2013 to 2022 is where we have this information from PFF. Guys who did really, really well during the preseason, and Mac Jones. Now, maybe looking back, we don't think that much of Mac Jones, but he also did well during the regular season. Mac Jones, Dak Prescott, Baker Mayfield, Brock Purdy, Daniel Jones were all guys who graded really well during the preseason. Zach Wilson also, but I have like the size of the dots or the points in this visualization are the number of dropbacks, and it's really, 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 really tiny for Zach Wilson. He didn't drop back that much as in the preseason as a rookie, so we probably shouldn't care about it too much. Kenny Pickett did pretty well. Again, another guy who actually had a decent passing grade as a rookie, but we may not like him that much. And so on. Now, there have been some misses, like Blake Bortles did really well during the preseason back in 2013. In fact, Neil Payne of 538 wrote an article about it. I have some information. I have like a chart that he had on here from an article. And it was actually prompted by the fact that Blake Bortles looked pretty good, and whether we should believe it or not. And, he was not good as a rookie. He had a better second year, but not so good as a rookie. Other guys who vastly underperformed based upon what they did in the preseason. DeShone Kizer, remember, you probably don't remember, but the 2017 quarterback class coming out with Trubisky, Mahomes, Watson, Kaiser. Kaiser looked pretty decent, especially I think in the first preseason game that he had, and people are like, "Oh man, maybe the Browns got a steal." No, didn't get a steal. Teddy Bridgewater is a guy who did pretty well as a rookie, but we're not necessarily seeing guys with a ton of upside who did well, but they are guys who performed well as rookies. So maybe there's some correlation here. Lots of noise potentially for rookies, but maybe there's something there. So we should be encouraged. Now, if we could get in and analyze every piece of contextual evidence and this and that, we might get some more stuff from there. But we also have guys who did pretty well as rookies, like Deshaun Watson, who stunk in the preseason. Okay, so that's looking at rookies. So maybe we have something there, and we'll talk about the rookies later. More importantly, perhaps, is dispelling the fact that any quarterback who's a second-year quarterback, who we're looking at these guys a lot. We're looking at the Anthony Richardsons, the Will Levises of the world. Maybe Bryce Young if he ends up playing some. We look at those, there's not much to it when it comes to preseason grade versus regular season grade for the second-year quarterbacks. Pat Mahomes was pretty meh during the preseason, at least according to PFF grading, and of course he was awesome. Guys who are really, really good by preseason pass grading, who were second-year quarterbacks: Justin Fields, Mason Rudolph, Dak Prescott, which is interesting because Dak Prescott had a kind of poor second year. He had a sophomore slump type of year. Josh Rosen was pretty good in his preseason there. And, all these guys were kind of stunk during the regular season. Or no, they weren't good during the regular season. So that seems to be a bigger thing. Is ignore the second year guys. Yeah, they've started to get their feet wet. They should know the system. They're going against backups most of the time. They've given us evidence as a rookie that we've seen that should be more important than what we're seeing in a few preseason snaps. So not a whole lot there. Whereas the rookies, maybe there is something there. And when it comes to the rookies, again, we're kind of splitting very small samples here. So, caveat analysis on caveat analysis. There's not much there with clean pocket passing correlations when it comes to rookies in the preseason and then in their passing grade. Most of it is actually driven by their pressure passing. So how well are they dealing with pressure? Maybe we can get a little bit of an instinct for how well they can deal with NFL pressure based upon what we're seeing in the preseason. Again, do we want to read into it too much? No, but at least we have a baseline of knowing that what the research tells us, and that is, forget about the second-year guys. Don't read into it too much, but maybe we're getting something from the rookies if we can contextualize it properly. We don't want to overread into everything, but it's possible. Okay, so with that background, again, that research and more available, unexpectedpoints.substack.com. Let's talk about some of what we saw. So I'll talk about some of the second-year quarterbacks first, which, again, we shouldn't read too much into. But I watched Will Levis, and I thought he was decent. But the only real takeaway that I think can be meaningful there is he scrambled near the goal line, didn't make it, took a big hit, which is probably not exactly smart, but he looks pretty spry. So I don't know, especially for a fantasy perspective, if you want a guy who's going to do some rushing, who's willing to tuck and run in that situation, I thought that was interesting. And he also did a sneak quarterback. I mean, he's a big dude. He's a big boy. So if they're going to run that in Carolina and he's going to get some goal line touchdowns, that could be somewhat interesting. Don't read into it too much, but 2 rushing attempts within the 10-yard line, one, within the 1-yard line for Will Levis. Interesting. Anthony Richardson, not great. He had a turnover-worthy throw that on third down, and then the next third down, he only played 2 drives, so we don't have a whole lot. So he probably should have thrown an interception. Well, again, I shouldn't say that because even when we say should have been an interception, even dropped INTs are only, even INT worthy throws are only ended up being caught 40% of the time by the defense. So anyway, it was an INT worthy-ish sort of throw. And then the next third down, he threw it behind the receiver, where if he would have led them, I think he could have got a first down. But, not a lot to see from Richardson, but kind of leads into a little bit of the Rorschach test that Richardson was last season, where if you said to yourself, this guy's too inaccurate to make it in the NFL, well, he was inaccurate as a rookie. And if you said to yourself, well, this guy avoids sacks and he can make big throws and he can rush, well, yeah, he kind of did those things. He did those things as a rookie. He had both sides of it. He's going to need to be more accurate, though, to really be successful in the NFL. So that's why I may be a little bit lower, mostly based upon what he did last year. And again, not a lot to see on this one. For other quarterback competitions, now, let's go to the rook. Well, let's go to other quarterback competitions really quickly. Again, I have another piece of research at Unexpected Points about quantifying the different quarterback competitions. If anyone wants to check that out, where I use the Bayesian updating model to look at different quarterbacks. So Fields versus Wilson looks like this has been pulled off the board. So everyone believes it's going to be Wilson after Fields struggled somewhat, fumbled the ball twice, or bad snaps twice, took a couple sacks in only a couple of drives. Wilson's not super high because I discount older years when it comes to how I project them going forward, but he has a higher median, maybe a little bit lower upside because Fields has, less of a history. We kind of know who Russell Wilson is a little bit more, but he has way, 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 way less downside. And that's probably something that's important to a defensive-based team that expects to make the playoffs, like the Pittsburgh Steelers. Wilson's not going to be a Hall of Fame sort of guy like he was many years earlier in his career, where he had excellent grading and EPA per play. But even if you look at the last few seasons, and it didn't feel this way necessarily if you were watching Broncos games in 2022 and 2023, but other than Fields 2 years ago, where he broke off a lot of, like 60-yard scrambles to boost his EPA per play to get it into the positive. Other than that, only Wilson's 2022, so 2 seasons ago, was worse than Fields' best season. So Wilson last year was better than what Fields did in his best season. Wilson in 2021, where he kind of had a down year for the Seahawks before coming over to the Broncos, was better by PFF offensive grade and by EPA per play than Fields' best season. So, even the upside when it comes to Fields may be a little bit overstated. Another one where I think the betting markets have it almost even is whether it be Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. O'Connell played the first drive, so we did start the preseason game, so maybe that gives him a little bit of an edge. But Minshew led to points. Now, Minshew's performance, though, I think was pretty up and down. He had some long passes. It wasn't a high completion percentage. It was kind of more of an outlier sort of thing. And if you look at what their expectations are by my numbers, almost the same. Minshew slightly higher because he's kind of this like perfect median quarterback who's going to give you like solid backup results. O'Connell's also there when it comes to EPA per play, but weirdly last year, O'Connell had like a really strong offensive grade, near a 90 offensive grade in the limited time he had last season, but his EPA per play was negative. So I'm guessing some drops there. I'm guessing some unlucky interceptions, maybe some unlucky fumbles, things like that. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two. But even if the truth lies somewhere between the two, when you consider the upside O'Connell might have, you consider the fact that the Raiders are, at least they shouldn't be assuming they're going to make the playoffs, so they should be willing to take on more risk. Sounds like Antonio Pierce likes him. Yeah, he'll probably get he probably should get the nod week 1, despite the fact that Minshew was maybe a little bit better during the one preseason game. All right, let's go to discussing the rookies. I'm going to go in draft order here when talking about what they did in week 1 and how that maybe some confirmation bias might play into that, or some highlight bias. I think highlight bias is a big thing when it comes to social media. So let me start with Caleb Williams. 2 drives for Williams. We saw a couple of impressive plays a lot on social media. I wouldn't be surprised if most people thought Williams had the best preseason outing? I don't think so, because of the lack of sample versus McCarthy. And then also, I think there were some things in there that maybe you could be slightly concerned about that I'll talk about. But so 2 drives. I think they got points on both of them. But we saw a lot. He had a little flip ball where he was about to get sacked that he flipped it out to the running back, kind of Mahomesian type of play, which was then taken for a first down, which looked good. He converted a 3rd and long, I think, on the first series of downs, which looked good. He had an impressive throw downfield where he rolled to his right, kind of clutched one time while he was going to his right, and then ended up finding Cole Kmet down the sideline for a big gain. That was kind of like the NFL throw, making things happen type of throw. Only certain guys can do this type of throw. So that was good. The flip side, and the part that probably isn't talked about enough, and maybe it had to do with some of my concerns about Williams coming out. I mean, I thought he was the number 1 prospect, don't get me wrong. But one thing that was a little bit concerning about him is he had a high sack to pressure ratio, I guess you could call it, or the percentage of pressures which was turned into sacks. It was around 23% his final season at USC, which put him near the top or bottom, however you want to position your labeling on that, near the worst for anyone coming out in the 2024 class. Certainly the worst of the top draft picks, the top quarterback prospects there. Jaden Daniels was in the neighborhood, but not quite as bad. So in this game, if you watched, he had one play where he held the ball quite a while on 3rd down and then rolled out of the pocket eventually, where, that could have been a sack if they got a little bit better pressure on there. And he just held the ball a decent amount. He had 3.56 or 3.6, if you want to just say that, time to throw, which was high, the highest of the class. I'm not saying we're in a Justin Fields type of situation with holding on to the ball too long, but there's some of that. Maybe trying to make a little bit too much happen. There's some potential for that. Again, he had a good scramble on 3rd and 9, so he showed that. But that was the downside. He had a turnover where the throw, at least according to me, that was wiped out by penalty. I don't think they marked that at PFF as being so. And it was near the end zone, so it was a bad timing. It would have been a bad situationally to have thrown that. But overall, definitely a positive. Probably not as positive, though, as what we're seeing on social media from Williams. Okay, for Daniels in May, so this 2 and 3 pick, two different situations here. We see Jaden Daniels is pretty much locked in as the starter. Drake May is seen as someone who's likely not going to start. The most recent numbers I checked on that was May at plus 550. So a pretty low chance. We're talking about less than a 20% chance of him starting week 1 with Jacoby Brissett there. So Brissett was in there, looked pretty decent. And then May came in, 1 drive. That's it. The Patriots, they're running the ball on 2nd and 14 in the rain, setting up a 3rd down for him, which I think they picked up on a screen pass. So it was kind of crazy. He had another dump off. So he had a screen pass and a dump off on 3rd down. Nothing, absolutely nothing we got from Drake May to even dig our teeth into the slightest bit. Daniels, 1 drive. So again, very little, very little. His first pass was a little bit rushed and too high to a running back standing about 5 feet away from him. He had another good downfield pass. He had a read option touchdown that he scored. So people are pretty happy about that. But again, did not get a lot. Did not get a lot from him there, but he's going to start. So he's going to start. And when it comes to Jacoby Brissett, he probably looks the best. And this is part of the research that I did on like who should start week 1. Jacoby Brissett kind of looks the best of the veterans who have a chance to start over rookies. I mean, in 2022, the season where he was starting until Deshaun Watson was out of suspension, I mean, he was great. He had a 80-something offensive grade, and his EPA per play, I think, was easily within the top 10. So much better than what we'd seen there. His other numbers haven't been great, but he had pretty good grading in 2021 in limited time. 2019 with his other season where he played a decent amount, looked pretty good there. 2017, he wasn't that great by either measure. So I don't know, solidly average, maybe with not a ton of upside for Brissett, but that might be enough when we're talking about who should start whether between him and Drake May. And again, we did not see much Drake May at all. So don't look into it too much. Just going down the draft board, let's go to Penix. 4 drives, lots of quick reads, which I thought was interesting. It wasn't that he was dinking and dunking, right? Because if you look at Penix, let me bring up the numbers here. His ADOT was 8.6 yards, so it wasn't that tiny, although he had some tiny passes in there. But it was almost like he was in the shotgun, or what they would call a 3-step drop, although if you're in the shotgun, you're kind of not really even taking very tiny steps. We talk about 3-step drop, but it was a lot of that. Just boom, boom, out, boom, boom, out, boom, boom, down the sideline. Not exactly going to second or third reads. It was kind of classifying it by what you're initially seeing and getting the ball out immediately. So not a lot to dig our teeth into. Looked very statue-esque in the pocket. So if we're talking about like Will Levis looking pretty spry, a lot of these guys looking pretty spry. Penix, I don't know. We'll see, but not looking pretty spry. And maybe that goes along with the fact that he was getting the ball out so quickly. No scrambles for him. Only faced 3 pressures. Again, he's getting the ball in 16 dropbacks. Again, he's getting the ball out very quickly. Move the ball okay, but not a lot to see there. And, clearly not going to be enough. I don't think we're going to see him displace Kirk Cousins as the starter there, unless there are some injury problems with Cousins. Let's move on to RIP, JJ McCarthy. So, I loved what I saw from JJ McCarthy, quite honestly. There was one drive for Sam Darnold, which ended on a failed 4th down, where Darnold looked okay, but there seems to be a little bit of a Darnold hive sort of coming on, and maybe I'll go to the numbers here where I agree that Darnold could look okay, and he has looked okay. So for 2023, in a very tiny sample, he had a good offensive grade and good EPA per play. In 2022, in a pretty small-ish offensive sample, he had a below average offensive grade, but good EPA per play, made some big plays there. Now, the 4 seasons for Darnold where we've had an actual decent sample, so his rookie year in 2018, 2019 actually was not that bad those years. Below average in both EPA per play and offensive grade, with some moments of looking really, really good, especially to end those seasons, and then looking really, really bad. And then he goes to Carolina, and in 2020 and 2021, just bad. Bad EPA per play, bad grading. Started off one of those seasons at least pretty well, and may have ended another season where he came in as an injury replacement. Okay. But just bad. So, I get it. He hasn't had good coaching. He hasn't had good receivers. He hasn't had good surroundings. He's young. He was very, very, very young. He was one of the youngest quarterbacks ever coming into the NFL. I mean, youngest by a few months, because I think he was born in April, where normally the youngest guys are like February or January birthdays, who are guys who turned 21 that year of the draft. So all that comes into play. But then can you say that he's done any better than the minimum expectation or a below average expectation with all of those factors? I don't think you can. So, his problem has always been he'll make some good plays and then he'll make some mind-blowing negative plays. And we'll see whether he can survive or not. But if we're going to look at the NFL schedule for the Vikings this year, they're going at Giants to start. So that's winnable. Then at home against the 49ers, at home against the Houston Texans, at Green Bay. And then week 5, it's officially a home game against the Jets, but it's in London against the Jets. And then you have a bye week 6. So if we have the more minor surgery for McCarthy, I don't know, week 7 seems like a pretty good spot for him to be potentially starting. Okay, but let's get to what happened with McCarthy specifically in this game. Okay, so he played a number of drives. I think it was was it 6 different drives that he played in here? I thought I had it in my notes, but no, I don't see it. But yeah, he played a lot in this game, coming in after that first drive for Darnold and then continuing on. And again, looked pretty good. Had the highest passing grade of 84 of anyone in the preseason with 19 dropbacks, completed 11 of 17 passes, 11.1 yards per attempt. Now he had a couple of big plays where guys were wide open in the game. He was facing a lot of pressure. The Raiders are just weird, right? Like the Raiders were starting all their starters on defense. I don't know if McCarthy was facing the starters, but they had all their starters in there. They were blitzing over and over again. So they pressured him 6 times. And these weren't like pressures that McCarthy was creating himself. These were like real pressures that were coming in. So they created 6 pressures and only 19 dropbacks. So that's an over 30% pressure rate. So that's a lot of pressure that he ended up facing there. 0 sacks. 3-second time to throw, but a lot of that is about the fact that, he had to look through some reads because of the defense and the fact that he scrambled a couple of times, one time successfully. That really helped him there. There was a drop in there. It wasn't hugely significant, but he also had a turnover-worthy play where, he's grading this well with the turnover-worthy play. And if you think about the turnover-worthy play, and this was kind of related to what I said earlier about Caleb Williams and the fact that he had what I thought was a turnover-worthy play, although it was on a defensive penalty, so it didn't count, near the end zone. McCarthy's turnover-worthy play came on a 3rd and long at midfield. So not close enough to be in field goal range. You really needed to pick up the whole first down in order to get into field goal range, and then some maybe. Blitz coming, tries to hit the receiver, it gets intercepted and then tackled immediately. It's one of these situational things where if you grade every turnover-worthy play the same, every interception the same, you're going to miss the context on this as saying this was like an okay interception. And I know, interceptions are not good, nerd. Like, how can you say that? No. Like, if you're going to throw an interception, you're at midfield, you are not, taking any points off the board. You really, really want to convert because you're adding a lot of points if you can convert that right there. You can't just make a short pass because you need enough yards to really force a potential for a 4th down attempt. And you have the blitz coming. So you're just flinging it up there. Hopefully you get it in the right spot. Hopefully your receiver can make a play, something like that. I think it was a good risk reward type of decision. And I like seeing that from him on that play. What else do we have here? Anyway, he looked good. I mean, he can move. He showed some arm strength. He threw the ball down the field. I like the play calling from Kevin O'Connell, going for on 4th down a couple of different times, converting once, not converting another time. He had a play for McCarthy. I think it was on his 3rd drive where when he rolled, he had someone right in his face and he basically just slung it sidearm, and it was incomplete, but hey, I like incompletions versus sacks. So I thought he looked really, really good. Of course, he's a younger guy. We'll see what ends up happening there. But a lot of people thought he looked good. He had the best grade, right, for the week. So I may not be that different from the consensus, but I'm probably closer in looking at him and how he played there than the consensus might be a little bit out ahead of me when it comes to someone like Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels also. Bo Nix. Now I'm going to bring up, for those who know, okay, what's his name at QB school? I can't remember his name right here. But he's the guy. They're coming for Bo Nix already, because obviously Bo Nix is not going to be the quarterback whisperer's favorite sort of guy. So the QB school here. What is this guy's name? I feel like I got to at least say it here. God, he doesn't even have his name on the website. What is going? JT O'Sullivan. That's what it was. Oh, JT O'Sullivan. He's a good lad. So his tweet on this was, if you love quick outs, check downs, and throwing off platform when you could set your feet, you're going to love Bo Nix. So I consider that sounds like some shade That sounds like some Bo Nix shade there. It's kind of like, yeah, he had good numbers. They scored a lot when he was in there. You got a pretty healthy sample from him, but maybe he isn't buying it that much. So what do we get from Nix? Now, Nix's PFF grading is not that good, which doesn't surprise me because I think some of what JT is saying about it blends into this. It's kind of like, well, he made the plays that he needed to make, so we're not going to give him credit for that. Well, sometimes making the plays you need to make is important. I probably value that more than a lot of people do. 22 dropbacks, so the most significant sample other than Jack Plummer. I keep on wanting to say Jake Plummer, who was playing for the Carolina Panthers. So the most significant sample of any of the rookie quarterbacks. He completed 15 of 21 passes for 131 yards, so 6.2 yards per attempt. Not great on the yards per attempt, but good on the completion percentage. I don't have the EPA number, but I bet the EPA number would also look pretty good because there's a lot of conversions on those passes. In fact, he converted 8 first downs, tied with JJ McCarthy for the most of anyone that week. He had a touchdown. There was not a lot being pushed down the field, but he did have one long pass that went through the arms of, I want to say, Josh Reynolds. That could have been a touchdown on a 4 verts type of situation, about 22, 23 yards outside of the end zone. So he did push the ball down there, but only 7.4 yards on the ADOT. So that would be the complaints, is that he wasn't pushing the ball down, all those sorts of things. He did get one big-time throw grade here for PFF. Perhaps that was on the dropped pass here. But what I thought was impressive about Nix is that he was under some pressure. I mean, 4 pressure and 22 dropbacks is not that bad. But he got the ball out quickly. He moved around pretty well in the pocket. He just seemed to be operating well. And it was the Russell Wilson fit with Sean Payton never really made sense to me. So I kind of get this fit a lot more when it comes to what Nix is doing. And he is just never going to be the guy that the QB hipsters of the world love. He's always going to be, on the Ringer QB rankings. He's just never going to be that high, no matter how well he performs, because he's just not that guy. But he did some really impressive things. And I think the most impressive thing he did was, with about a minute left on roughly their own 15-yard line, he drove the Colts all the way down to the 10-yard line. They almost scored and got a kick like before the half. Like, he was operating the offense. And I don't think you have to be an older prospect to be able to step in more quickly, but the fact that he's 24 and he's a 5-year starter probably has something to do with that. So I think it's positive for him. Like, I might be more positive in the market on anyone when it comes to Nix, which wouldn't be surprising because his numbers, at least from an EPA perspective, were really, really good in this game. Actually, they didn't credit him with the turnover-worthy throw. I thought his first pass was kind of a turnover-worthy play where some pressure bothered him and he made a bad decision. But they actually didn't credit with him on PFF at least. So where do the markets stand again? Most people think May is not going to start. McCarthy is obviously off the board, and Nix is minus 310. Yeah, I would definitely be starting him over Jarrett Stidham, who gives you basically no sample and nothing to dig your teeth into as far as quarterback play so far this year. And Nix operated well, handpicked by Sean Payton. Let's just do it. Let's roll with him. I was pretty positive for what he ended up doing here, but he's always going to be a more limited quarterback than what we've seen from McCarthy or Daniels or May or Caleb Williams. It's just always going to be the case. But if he can operate well in that offense, then that's a whole different situation. Or that's like sufficient, I guess we should say. It's sufficient to have a functional, good offense. I mean, Drew Brees is, if you want to go back to exactly, it's like functional athleticism, good movement in the pocket, delivering the ball on time to where it needs to go. And yards per attempt matter more than yards per completion, right? The missing element there is your completion percentage. And I don't think anyone doubts the fact that Nix can be accurate on those quick outs and those other passes. It makes your degree of difficulty a little bit higher if you can't get big chunk plays as often to continue to matriculate down the field on those sorts of things. But, maybe you can do it. Let's see if we got any questions here, and then I'll fire out of here. This is from Faris 39. Sorry, mispronunciation there, I'm sure. Jerry Jones said there was no urgency for signing CeeDee Lamb, with players asking for a contract adjustments every time the market goes up. How far from he is the truth, i.e. A.J. Brown, DJ Moore? Well, I mean, it's a little bit of a different situation than like readjusting a contract because, CeeDee Lamb's trying to get that extension going into the 5th-year option for his next big contract. I think the problem is like this ratchet effect where I assume that CeeDee Lamb wants Justin Jefferson money and he's not worth it. Well, he's not as valuable as Justin Jefferson, at least, right? And then you combine that with the fact that you have Dak Prescott, you have Micah Parsons, you have other players that you need to worry about there for the Cowboys, and then it becomes a little bit more of an issue. Then maybe playing it out, drafting another receiver next year, franchise tagging. I mean, and the Cowboys are, notorious for letting these things play out. You could say it burnt them for Dak Prescott, but I mean, I remember a lot of people saying they should just let Dak Prescott go back in the day when they were negotiating with him. And then they didn't end up doing that. They ended up doing the double franchise and putting himself behind the 8 ball contract wise. But, sometimes it works. Sometimes it does in these situations. Jerry should have the money, I guess. So that shouldn't be a factor. Is there any benefit to being a Vikings fan? Yeah, I know Vikings fans are way down, but this is immaterial in my opinion in the longer run. I think it'll be fine unless it's a full tear. Then you really got an issue there. And development and all that sort of stuff. If we want to talk about McCarthy, I think he should be fine either way. Patrick Cocker here. Maybe just wanted me to say that. It's hilarious how these players want long contracts for security just to get angry 2 years before the end of the contract because APY is an elite versus market due to fiat inflation. Oh wow, we're getting fiat in here. We got a gold bug. We got a Bitcoiner. We got a holder. Yeah, I mean, whatever. I mean, he's only the last year of his contract, I think, for Reddick. So use your leverage. I don't care if you use your leverage. These teams need to have a little bit more backbone. And it sounds like the Jets are going to do that in this situation. More from Patrick here. Also, rookie contracts being a 4 or 5 year block during athletic prime is such a crazy boon for front offices. Salary cap value gain there is nuts. Yeah, I mean, it is. That's why nerds love their draft picks so much. That's why taking multiple shots on these guys, even if most of them wash out, the cost doesn't matter that much. And all you need to do is hit on one of them and you make up for the washed out cost on half a dozen other draft picks that don't end up working out. So yeah, I mean, that would be the one thing if you were going to like make it more fair would be shorter rookie contracts or something like that. But the problem is like you're pitting in these CBA negotiations, the veterans versus the rookies. If the veterans are the ones voting on everything, right? They're not going to necessarily want to change the system to pay the rookies more or to give the rookies a chance to hit the market faster because it's all one pool of money that they're trying to get a hold of. Dr. Tough Guy. What is the late bloomer probability on a bad young QB? When you factor in draft equity from badness plus later bloom chance plus comedic value, is it okay to play a crappy young guy for 3+ years? I mean, I would say no. Whatever it is, and I don't know if we can quantify what it is, like the probability of someone breaking out after 2 bad seasons, let alone 3 bad seasons, is probably lower than what we expect it to be. Because when they're playing bad, everything kind of looks bad, right? Like let's imagine CJ Stroud played poorly last year. Well, then everyone would have looked around and said, oh my God, this is like, he has horrible surroundings. Look at this offensive line, fell apart with injuries. You got a bunch of no-name receivers, blah, 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 right? So how people play ends up affecting our perceptions of how good their surroundings were too. So when a quarterback fails over and over again, we're talking about Sam Darnold maybe here or whoever, it's probably some bad surroundings. It's also probably like he didn't do anything to help maximize those surroundings. So I think most of the time we cut these guys too much slack than not enough. So that's where my bias would to say, Get rid of them earlier if you can, or trade them away. Like the Jets got a nice little bounty for trading them away, a shockingly good bounty. Joe Douglas is a clown. I think every meme is justified. Another comment here. Yeah, I mean, Jets fans have been hating me and most nerds for a long time because of what we have said about this. Of course, we were also negative about Breece Hall. Excuse me, not Bryce. Breece Hall, and he's been okay, but still, it's a running back. Dry Defender says Kirk Cousins comes to mind as a year 4 breakout, but he probably would have broken out earlier if he was developed, committed as a starter. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. I think he, if we would have gotten more of a sample earlier, I think it would have been good. And he looked pretty good. I think from the moment he got in there, he was at least functional, right? Whereas Sam Darnold hasn't even been functional enough to win some of the time, and that's been part of the problem. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for the comments, tuning in. Herms will maybe be back next week. See if I can convince him to actually watch some football and talk with me about this stuff. I got an interview later this week with Mike Leone from Establish the Run. Very excited about that one. Anyone who's not checking out everything that they're doing over there at ETR really needs to. The podcast that he just does with Evan Silva, I don't know what they call it. I don't know if they call it Man versus Machine or what they call it, where it's like the spreadsheet socialist, as Evan Silva calls Mike Leone, comparing their projections. I'm always on Leone's side. Well, not always, but I'm on his side like 85% of the time as a spreadsheet socialist myself. Or should we be the spreadsheet capitalists? It would be more capitalist probably to be a spreadsheet guy, and then the socialist more based on vibes and memes. But anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll have that interview in a couple of days. We'll tape it on Thursday. I'll go live here so you guys can jump in and get your questions in if you want. And then, of course, have that out into the podcast sphere thereafter. And then I'm going to be on vacation next week. I'm still going to try to do the pod and other stuff. It may be not the most ideal circumstances when it comes to internet connection and setup and all that, but we'll get it done. I appreciate the support from everyone out there, and then I'll be talking at you again in a couple of days. Thanks so much.